Few celebrities reached the level of universal adoration that Bob Ross achieved, but it turns out the legendary painter had more than a few dark secrets behind that gentle smile. Bob Ross was born in 1942 and raised in the Orlando, Florida area. His parents split up early in Ross's life, filing for divorce when the future artist was around a year and a half old. Both of his parents remarried, and while Ross was raised primarily by his mother, he kept communication lines open with his father, carpenter Jack Ross, who hired his son to work for him.
I'm very prejudiced, but I think I had the greatest mother there was.
Ross needed to go to work, as he ended his education after dropping out of high school during his freshman year, according to the biography Happy Trees, Happy Clouds, The Bob Ross Phenomenon. It was during this early period of Ross's employment with his father that he severed and lost part of his finger in a woodcutting accident. Thankfully, although surely gruesome at the time, the injury did not interfere with his ability to hold a paintbrush. Even longtime fans of Ross may be surprised to hear that he was in the military. In the early 1960s, he joined the U.S. Air Force and he departed Florida to an assigned post in Alaska. The natural landscapes of the state inspired Ross's desire to make art, so he painted during his downtime and sold his works to local gift shops. His earnings from art soon exceeded his Air Force salary, which allowed him to plan for his post-military future, which for Ross couldn't come soon enough. In the Air Force, Ross served as a first sergeant, an authoritative position that needed a certain temperament. In 1990, he told the Orlando Sentinel, "I was the guy who makes you scrub the latrine, the guy who makes you make your bed, the guy who screams at you for being late to work. The job requires you to be a mean, tough person, and I was fed up with it." Ross made a promise to himself that if and when he retired from the military, he'd henceforth never shout or raise his voice. In 1981, after 20 years of service, he left the Air Force and made sure to keep his pact. In fact, that personal stand against the harshness of military life inspired Ross's uniquely soft-spoken, whisper-adjacent method of speech on the joy of painting. During his period of service in the U.S. Air Force, Ross met and subsequently married a woman named Vicky. Before long, the pair had a son, Stephen, but eventually split.
My parents, they had a pretty shaky relationship. Eventually divorced.
While still serving in the military in the 1980s, Ross met a U.S. Department of Defense employee and painter named Jane. They married in the 1980s and remained together until the early 1990s, when Ross suffered two profound losses in rapid succession. In 1991, his mother died at the age of 71. Then, just the following year, Jane died of cancer. Ross began hosting The Joy of Painting in 1983, the same year he'd experienced the first in a series of medical problems. Ross was diagnosed with recurring cluster headaches so severe that he'd eventually need hospitalization. The voracious smoker also survived a heart attack in 1986 and then received a cancer diagnosis for which he received treatment and recovered. Nevertheless, Ross reportedly grew resigned to the fact he would die at a relatively young age. The cancer would return in the early weeks of 1994 in the form of lymphoma, which affects the lymphatic system, part of the body's network of immunity defenses. Despite a small chance of recovery, Ross submitted to physically taxing anti-cancer chemotherapy and radiation treatments, which led to the loss of his famously towering curly hair. He even wore a wig when taping what would be his final episodes of The Joy of Painting. Sadly, Ross died from cancer on July 4, 1995. Fulfilling his own ominous premonition, he was only 52 years old. In the last 12 months of his life, Ross appeared in the first episode of The Adventures of Elmer and Friends. It centered on Elmer, a happy little tree like so many described on Ross's The Joy of Painting. Ross's final work, it taped before his 1995 death, but didn't air until 1996, along with a dedication to the painter at the end of the episode. Entrepreneurs Walt and Annette Kowalski discovered Ross when he was an aspiring painter in the early 1980s, offering to house and feed him if he taught painting classes they'd arrange.
I called Bob and I said, "I don't know what you've got, but I think we ought to bottle it and sell it."
That led to an Indiana TV affiliate launching Ross's The Joy of Painting in 1983, which was soon syndicated to more than 200 other stations. So, Ross and the Kowalskis formed Bob Ross Incorporated to manage the series and a spin-off line of art supplies. As Ross's celebrity grew, he attempted some brand extensions on his own, which irked the Kowalskis, as did an unfavorable shift in Bob Ross Incorporated ownership shares in 1992 after the death of Ross's wife and stakeholder, Jane. As Ross's death approached in 1995, Walt pushed him to sign a contract that would grant rights over all his work in perpetuity in exchange for a 1% profit share for 10 years. Ross wouldn't sign and then rewrote his will, excluding the Kowalskis and leaving control of his name, image, and work to his son Steve and half-brother Jimmy Cox. Ross additionally removed Annette Kowalski as the executor of his estate in favor of his wife, whom he'd married a few weeks earlier. Nevertheless, the Kowalskis sued for control of the Ross estate and won, leading to a flood of Ross-branded merchandise. Ross's intended heir, his son Steve Ross, sued for control in 2017, but lost the case.